Well, it's almost 10 minutes after 2 o'clock on the midday view. The embattled South African Airways, as SAA, now has an interim chief executive in place. Let's shift this hour to my colleague, that's the business editor, Devan Murugan. Good afternoon, Devan Murugan. For more on what the future holds for the airline, I believe Thomas Kgokolo is chatting to you now.
He is very much indeed, brother, and thanks very much. And this is the fifth person in 5 years to lead the struggling state-owned airline. We know the business rescue process has been delayed. It's now been running for 16 months. 10 days ago, Thomas Kgokolo, a chartered accountant, also a member of the permanent faculty at the Gordon Institute of Business Studies, was placed in the position of interim CEO at the airline. Well, he joins us now. Mr. Kgokolo, thanks very much indeed for chatting to us this afternoon.
Good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity to be interviewed, and also good afternoon to viewers and the loyal customers of SAA.
So you would have been watching the turmoil at this airline in recent years, which many have described as nothing but a mess. Yet you've stepped in. Why did you take this job?
Thanks. If one were to say it's a mess, it is our mess as a country. I just felt that as a professional, this afforded me the opportunity to use my skills and experience to contribute meaningfully to the country. More importantly, if this national asset fails, is a reflection of us as a country. And one thought that let me see what I can do to then contribute to make sure that we can rebuild a sustainable airline that we can be proud of.
Thomas, I want to talk about that contribution. So the board of directors says your responsibility is preparing the airline to transition from business rescue proceedings. Now, I'm wondering how far those responsibilities stretch in terms of the future of this airline. What's your mandate in that regard?
All right. My mandate comprises of a couple of things. The first one is to see it that we transition well out of the business rescue, meaning that the business rescue will hand over the business back to management and the board, and then we make sure that we can then establish processes, and then we can do catch-up on things like financial statements and recruitment of various vacant positions. In addition to that, I need to then make sure that we then prepare the airline for a takeoff later this year. So meaning that we need to go through the necessary compliance routines. We need to make sure that we've got our pilots retrained. As you can imagine, that they've not been flying for quite some time. So from a regulatory point of view, we need to do some bit of training before they get up in the sky. So those are the two major things that I'm responsible for during my interim period.
But I want to get a sense of whether or not you have a contribution to the long-term sustainability of South African Airways. I mean, as an interim CEO, do you see yourself really contributing to this airline being sustainable long-term in the future?
Of course. I think it will be, naive of me to just come and, plan short-term. The intention of also taking off later this year as well with the restart plan is to also ensure that we create a strategy that will allow the airline to grow, depending on how the market improves as well, in terms of adding more fleet, adding more routes as well. So we're not just looking at the next 4 months and then working out of it. We're thinking long term and also preparing the airline should there be a strategic equity partner coming on board, making sure that the airline is functional so that in the long term, it is indeed able to then take us forward.
We'll talk about that equity partner in a moment, but can you tell us this afternoon when this airline starts flying again?
Yes. Obviously, this is my second week in the job, and the assessment we've made with the team and the board as well, we're looking at around about July or August or so. However, I must say that there are some complexities around that. as it is dependent on, we know we've got our pilots that are on strike. We need to work hard in making sure that we resolve that particular stalemate, and also the compliance environment as well. As you know very well that we have not been flying for quite some time. So we are working around the clock to make sure that the compliance environment is ready. And indeed, we're looking at about July, August this year.
So the one cloud indeed is this long-running dispute with the pilots. But there's also, the uncertainty around aircraft being used, or is there some sort of concrete view now on what aircraft SAA will use as it takes off?
Yeah, look, I mean, we have reduced, most of our fleet. I think we've got just about over 6 there. So there is no uncertainty. We're quite comfortable with what we are going to be using. And also, the restart plan will include the type of aircraft that we will be using going forward. As you can imagine, that this is a very low-margin environment where you compete on your ability to really manage cost. So we need to ensure that the aircraft that we bring are fuel efficient, they are latest technology as well, and also ensure that our recapitalization, or basically our usage of aircraft policy or strategy, allows us to replenish this aircraft as we continue. Because you don't want to keep them too long until they are outdated, and the next thing you're sitting with a fuel inefficient type of aircraft. So the intention is that we do have aircraft available to start, and we are quite comfortable that these will be the efficient ones, and in the long run, we'll be looking at boosting it with much more better ones.
Are they enough to get this started, as you say, in July and August?
Oh yes, yeah. No, we do have enough to get us going. And remember, what we plan to do with our restart is to stagger it. We're not just going to go up and do all routes. We're going to look at routes that possibly will give us high yields, both domestically and regionally. We are not going to start with the international route as yet. We will then focus on, domestic and regional, and we believe that we've got sufficient aircraft to get us going.
Well, I mean, the COVID climate at the moment also puts some barriers to flying internationally. But I want to ask you the question about capital. I mean, if you don't secure the funding, you don't secure the capital, then the exercise around SAA would be futile, I would imagine. No one would disagree that a lot of that rests on this equity partner. Have we found one already?
A very good question. First of all, what we must clarify is that out of the business rescue, the company is currently solvent. And more importantly, that gives us a bit of an edge to then kickstart. But you are quite right. The critical ingredient to this is the strategic equity partner. And this process is being managed by the Department of Public Enterprise. This is our shareholder. As you can imagine, they are the equity holders, then they need to manage the process. From what we gather as management is that there is interest. Where it is and what is currently being discussed, we don't have the details. Our role as management is to get the company functional, but again, in relation to the strategic equity partner, to make sure that we are ready for a due diligence. Strategic equity partners will come through, do some due diligence to make sure that whatever it is that they're looking for of the company is there. So yes, it is a critical one being managed by the department.
But I mean, your involvement in that equity part and how we reach there, you would say is limited. I mean, that rests entirely with the department, does it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, we can make inputs where we are required. I'm sure the board is in touch with the department, but at a management level, for us is just to make sure that we are ready should a due diligence be required, and we are able to demonstrate that we are a functional airline.
All right, let's look forward to this date that you've given us, July, August, where we take off. I mean, we've had the entire aviation industry brutally hit by COVID-19. Many of your competitors have already worked very hard to get a slice of the market in this period of turmoil. SAA would be starting behind in this context, wouldn't it?
Of course. I think that's what gives me sleepless nights, that I'm already behind the queue. But this requires us to really think out of the box. And you will understand that the environment as it is now requires, those who win, or those who, continue to succeed in this environment are those who can manage cost efficiently. So what we are very grateful of is that as we get out of the business rescue, we are much more leaner or smaller, if I may put it like that. Before we had just over 4,000 employees. Now we're sitting with about 700 or so. So that gives us the opportunity to limit our cost in the income statements or in our operations as well. And one of the things we'll be looking at, we'll be taking advantage of our Voyager program because we still believe that there are loyal customers of SAA that will want to see us getting back in the air. So we're going to leverage that particular brand equity as well. And also having remodeled at a smaller scale, I think that gives us a fair chance to go into the market and compete. But this will be complex. It's not going to be very easy as well. But having spoken to the team and having spoken to the board, we're ready to give it a good punch. Huh?
And, I suppose a part of that strategy, of course, would be using the subsidiary airline, which is Mango. And I've got to ask you about this. We've got reports over the last 24 hours that the airline was set to be grounded from next month, until it received funding from the government. So the big issue here is, as I see it, is that it's still trying to get some of that 10.5 billion rand allocated to SAA to those subsidiaries, one of it being Mango. Where does this position of Mango at the moment leave you at SAA as you plan to strategize this?
Yes, it's quite a difficult position to be in as well. And as you rightfully say so, what we have done as an SAA board is that we'll give the Mango management and the board an opportunity to look at that particular situation, and then a proper feedback will be provided whenever there's clarity there. But from our side, yes, it gives us a bit of a hurdle to jump over. But in the next coming weeks or so, we will definitely be, in contact with our colleagues there, just to see how we then strategize going forward as well. As you can appreciate that this is something that just happened recently. We still need to sit down, assess, and come back with a proper plan of how do we then react to this particular unfortunate news.
One of the reasons I asked you is because one correspondence to employers that's been quoted and reported is that Mango may only receive money in June. Are you familiar with that?
I'm not familiar with that. What I can say is that these are conversations that will be taking place between the board of Mango and the shareholder as well, in terms of directly being the Department of Public Enterprise, if I may say so. So at this stage, I don't have the details that I can share with you around that particular issue. But our understanding is that once there is clarity around the date and when that particular funding will come, the board of Mango, together with management, will communicate that.
Right. Thomas, before I let you go, as you embark on this journey as interim CEO, you look back at the relationship, if you like, between the CEO, the SAA as a business, the unions, and then government as the main shareholder. This has not been a very pretty relationship, if you want to describe it that way. So a lot has to do with actually mending this so that you have some sort of strategy, a unified one, to get this airline going. And you're working on a base where historically this relationship just hasn't been good enough, has it?
Look, there's been some complexities around that particular relationship, I think is a fair question. And that is one of my responsibilities, and together with the board. We acknowledge that to get this airline back in the air and very functional in a sustainable way, it won't happen at a CEO level only. It will happen where we jointly, move forward together. And you can appreciate that in the next coming months or weeks or so, I will be, making an attempt to speak to various stakeholders. The complexities of it, you have already explained it as well. But it is important that we come together with different views that we have, of course, but ultimately understanding that the decisions we are making are solely for the success of the airline. And that is something that I'll be working hard on to make sure that at least those particular relationships can work together to take us forward. It's not going to be easy, but we are definitely putting it, giving it enough effort, because it is quite critical for us.
Oh, certainly, and we'll be chatting to you along the way. Thomas Kgokolo, thanks very much indeed for joining us, the interim CEO of SAA. Well, Dan, there you have it. I mean, some interesting views and words coming out of that interim CEO. We'll have to watch the next few months very closely, I suppose.